Hello and welcome to the Genuine Learning Blog. My name is Melissa Galasso, and I'm very excited to be here today to talk to you about a proposed change to Yellow Book. So we have been kind of waiting to see how this was going to play out. The AICPA last year issued their quality management standards, SQMS 1 and 2, and we were kind of wondering how that was going to work with Yellow Book. And very early on, Jim Delkin was pretty clear about that at the GAC conference last year for the AICPA and said, we're going to wait for them to issue it, and then we're going to figure it out. And they have figured it out. And so they've issued a very narrow, it's not a full update of all of the chapters of Yellow Book. In fact, it only impacts 2 chapters. The first one obviously is quality control. Second one is a very small update related to key audit matters because of changes in the audit standards. So let's take a look at what they are proposing. So this proposal came out on January 30th of 2023. Comments are due April 28th. So always a good amount of time. But notice, I think this is kind of interesting, that they are calling this the Government Audit Standards 2023 exposure draft, which means they're looking to get it out before the end of the year. So that should be a pretty interesting goal. That's a pretty quick turnaround. So let's see. And as I said, background here, AICPA, IAASB, they have issued their final standards for quality management, and the PCOB has a proposal out there. So we are seeing a movement away from quality control towards quality management. And so in terms of major changes, the first one is it's not going to try to make people do 2 things, to do duplicate effort. And I think that's really important because many of the firms are subject to the AICPA's quality management. However, state auditors are not subject to the AICPA's quality management. And since Yellow Book really addresses both independent public accountants as well as government audit organizations, they recognize that it might be a lot of work for an organization that is an independent public accountant, right, a CPA firm, to have to do 2 conflicting sets of standards. So what the first thing they announced was they're going to allow audit organizations that are already subject to either the IAASB or the AICPA's Auditing Standards Board quality management. They're going to let them comply with those standards and just a couple of extra Yellow Book specific requirements, again, trying to avoid burden of having to design multiple quality management systems, right? That's not really helpful. Consistent with the AICPA changes, they also added emphasis around leadership, right? So if you want quality, management can't be talking about efficiency and budgets and never talk about quality, right? So leadership is really important. Senior leadership needs to take an active role in quality management, and that's really around the culture and the ethics of the organization. So very similar to the AICPA, really diving into that culture of the firm and how to make quality front and center. They also, very similar to the AICPA's proposal, add a risk assessment process. So as part of this, they are going to request that you go through and do a full risk assessment, identify the objectives, what are the risks to achieving that, what is your risk response. So very similar to the AICPA, they're adding the entire risk assessment section to the Yellow Book. And also information and communication, another area that was new to the AICPA standards. And so you can kind of see that consistency there. And so it's part of the framework. So that leaves us with 8 components in here, starting with risk assessment, right? So the risk-based approach starts by trying to figure out what is the risk to quality, right? What could go wrong? Why would we issue a bad report? Why would we not have an audit or any type of engagement that doesn't, meet the standards? And so first off, we really need to understand where our risks are, and then how we take those quality objectives, we identify, we assess the risk, and then we design and implement the responses to those risks. So basically AUC 315 for the CPA firm or the government audit organization. We still are going to retain our government governance and leadership, independence, ethics, initiation, inception, acceptance, continuance, engagement, performance, resources, which we're going to address multiple types of resources there. And then again, the new one, information communication. How do we identify, capture, process, and maintain relevant and reliable information related to quality? Right? Are we tracking who our, repeat offenders are? How are we doing a really good root cause analysis into them? Are we, recognizing that we're going to need to be able to scale? Larger organizations that are more complex will do it differently than a smaller organization. And then obviously monitoring and remediation, key areas, we're really focusing on that root cause analysis. So as we look at the quality management, right, they emphasize monitoring throughout. Again, it's not just internal inspections once a year, peer review periodically, and we kind of call it a day, but really how are we monitoring, proactive, effective monitoring to really understand how do we tailor the monitoring activities for our organization. And so one of the other areas that, again, consistent with the AICPA's SQMS1 is looking at a requirement to really get to the root cause. You need to investigate the causes. You can't just do a very high level, not enough training. Well, why was there not enough training? What training was done? What training needs to be done? Very, very explicit in that process. And obviously, when we think about this, has to be scalable, right? So when we think about the types of organizations, you're going to have very small firms who are going to be involved in this all the way through very large firms. And so we really need to make sure that we understand some of the implications here. So when we're looking at the design, when we're looking at the implementation, when we're looking at the operations, how can we take this and really make it scalable for that organization, right? So an organization has one location versus 100 locations, right? Very different risks. Only one type of client versus multiple types of clients. And so that scalability is really important to be able to make sure that we're really being responsive to the risk of that particular organization. And then last but not least, another major change regarding quality management is the use of engagement quality reviews. So the AICPA issued a separate standard, SQMS2, on engagement quality reviews. This one, again, is very much in line with the spirit there, which is if you determine an engagement quality review is a response to your risk, and again, it's up to the organization to decide what the risk response is. But if you decide it is a quality review, that it talks about, okay, if you're addressing this risk, what are the policies and procedures the organization has to have in place to ensure that it is appropriate, right? So they're going to provide a little bit more guidance around the quality review process. So that's the key changes. Again, there is a little bit more to it, but we want to just give you some of the highlights of what to expect in this area. But there was one other thing that I really just want to remind people as we go through. Well, actually first, just some conforming amendments. Obviously they only updated chapters 5 and 6. We haven't talked about 6 yet. Chapter 5 is where we see all the quality control references. Obviously, all the references to quality control throughout the entire, Yellow Book will have to be updated to move them to quality management, and all the cross-referencing will need to be done. They didn't put it in this version. They're just looking at really the content changes. They're not looking at the clerical changes at this point. And so they're just really looking for feedback on, is this going to work in a government audit scenario? But as I was saying, there was one other thing that was not related to quality management in here, and it is related to CAM, not related to lease CAM or our common area maintenance, but CAM with a K, Key Audit Matters. So the AICPA's Auditing Standards Board in AUC Section 700, as they issued SAS, the 134 through 141 suite of reporting standards, introduced this concept of key audit matters. And they wanted to provide a little bit more clarity around financial audits and understand that in particular for government entities and entities that receive government assistance, whether it's a nonprofit, et cetera, in those scenarios, maybe how does this CAM work in this environment? And so now that the AICPA standards have been implemented, I'm sure at Yellow Book, the GAO probably got a lot of questions about how this works with respect to the Yellow Book. And so again, you're not mandated to issue CAM. You're only required under AUC Section 700 to issue, to write CAM if you're engaged to do so. So if you're not engaged to do so, you don't have to do it. But what this does is provide application guidance. They give us a separate paragraph 6.39, to provide an understanding of when this might apply. So for example, again, thinking about our entities that receive government financial assistance, they might want to draw attention, right, to some of the risks in that scenario. And so again, they're not mandating the use of CAM, and they do not, prohibit you from issuing a standard report that conforms only to the AICPA requirements. But this is just basically allowing for the use of CAM and when it might be appropriate in a Yellow Book engagement. All right, so some pretty big changes. What is the proposed effective date? So first and foremost, the design and the implementation would be 2 years from the issuance of the revision. So again, if we're looking at 2023, you would have to get your design done sometime by the end of 2025. And then once you've designed and implemented it, then you would have your evaluation 1 year later. So basically 3 years, looking at 2026 in this scenario. However, because again, many of these organizations are already going to have to implement the AICPA standards or the IAASB standards, they are allowing for early adoption here. And so hopefully that gives a little bit more flexibility, especially to the firms who are doing this in phases. A lot of firms have said the AICPA standard is not going to be something they do as a big bang. They're going to go through it piece by piece and implement pieces of it as they're going through, so that they don't just wait to the end to implement. They're really doing a nice phased in approach. So and a little bit of an option here also in the Yellow Book for that early adoption. All right, I know this was a little longer than normal, but I did want to make sure I got it out there and make sure that you guys are aware of some of these changes. So thank you guys so much for joining me. It was a pleasure having you today, and I hope to see you on a future blog. Have a great day, guys. Bye-bye.